Okay, guys, it got two books to this book. It's called The Heart of the Mountain Man and The Justice of the Mountain Man. But I'm gonna read The Heart of the Mountain Man. Heart of the Mountain Man, Chapter 1. Smoke Jensen came fully awake, his heart hammering as he sat up straight in the bed, his hand automatically reaching for the Colt .44 that was never very far from his grasp. Sally opened her eyes, blinked twice, and asked in a sleepy voice, "What is it, darling?" Smoke shook his head, forgetting for the moment she couldn't see him in the darkness. "I don't know," he answered, the hairs on the back of his neck staring at some as yet unexplained noise or movement. He turned his head toward the window, where a light breeze was bellowing the curtains, bringing into the room the sweet scent of mountain laurel and pine needles along with a hint of ozone that foretold of fall showers on the way. Sally glanced at the glint of moonlight on the barrel of Smoke's gun and sat up herself, reaching for the Colt Navy .36 caliber pistol on the table next to her side of the bed. "Something wrong there?" she asked. Smoke slipped out of bed and pulled on his buckskin trousers, which he flung over the back of a chair the night before. "I'll let you know in a minute, sweetheart. Go back to sleep." "Not on your life, Smoke. I learned never to ignore your instincts." She threw the covers back and grabbed a roll from the foot of the bed. "If something woke you up, then I'm going to go with you to find out what it is." She could see his teeth gleaming in the semi-darkness as he grinned at her. "Well, there's no need for both of us to lose sleep. Why don't you check it out and I'll go back to bed?" She put her hands on his shoulders, turned him around and pushed him toward the door. "I'll be right behind you." "So that's the way it is, huh?" he whispered over his shoulder. "I'll take all the risk and you stay safe behind me." "That's why God gave you such big shoulders, dear, so I could hide behind them," she answered with a chuckle. Smoke snorted. "That'll be the day." They walked through the darkness of the cabin and stepped to the back door. Smoke eased it open, aired back the hammer on his Colt, and stepped outside. Sally followed him out the door and stepped to his side, her Colt Navy held in front of her. The night was typical for early fall in the high lonesome of the Rocky Mountains where they had their ranch, Sugarloaf. The sky was crystal clear with millions of stars shining down like diamonds on the field of black velvet. The moon, though not full, shone with brilliance through the thin air, illuminating the area around the cabin with a ghostly yellow light. Lightning danced in dark, rolling clouds over distant mountain tops, and the faint sounds of thunder could be heard. Smoke's eyes stopped their movement and he pointed to the hitching post off to the side. "There's a horse," he said. Sally followed his gesture and could see a solitary horse standing next to the hitching post, its head down as it calmly munched on nearby grass. Its reins were hanging loose, as if it were wandered to the post by itself. "It's wearing a saddle, so there must be a rider somewhere close by," Sally whispered back. Smoke reached inside the cabin and grabbed his greener tea gone short barrel express gun off a rack next to the door. He stuck his Colt in his waistband and held the greener in both hands as he stepped off the porch and approached the riderless horse. "Be careful, Smoke. There may be more than one of them out there," Sally called softly, her eyes flicking back and forth as she tried to cover his back. Since Smoke had once been a notorious gunfighter, she knew there was always the possibility of men tracking him down, looking to get revenge for some perceived wrong Smoke had done them. "There's something familiar about this horse." Smoke set a puzzled expression on his face as he turned back to look at Sally. "I've seen that blaze on his forehead before." Sally took a closer look at the horse and realized she knew who its owner was. Wait a minute, Smoke, she said, putting her hand on the barrel of the shotgun and pushing it toward the ground. I think that's Monty Carson's horse. Smoke walked over to the horse and examined the saddle. You're right, Sally, it is Monty's mount. Monty Carson was the sheriff at Big Rock, Colorado, the closest town to the Jensen Ranch, and a dear friend of Smoke and Sally. When Sally got to Smoke's side, she noticed the look on his face. What's wrong, Smoke? You look like you've seen a ghost. He pointed at the side of the saddle. The leather was covered with a large stain, looking almost black in the moonlight, that ran down the sides of the saddle onto the fender skirts of the stirrups. Smoke put his finger on the stain and held it under his nose. The coppery scent brought back unpleasant memories of times he'd been shot. It's blood. Something's bad happened to Monty. He eased the hammers down on the shotgun and laid the barrel on his shoulder as he looked around, searching for his friend in the semi-darkness. I guess I'd better get some of the hands up and we'll do a search. If this blood's his, he's injured pretty bad. It won't do to leave him out here too long. Sally pulled her robe close around her against the chill of the mountain air. I'll get some water on the stove to boil and have any my medical kit handy. Smoke nodded his approval. Put some coffee on too, please. We're going to need it if we spend too much time out here in the cold. Sally walked back toward their cabin, and Smoke proceeded to the bunkhouse across the wide yard. He opened the door and moved to the wood stove in the corner, which was still warm from the evening before. He lit a lantern on a shelf and picked up a coffee pot and banged it on the stove a couple of times. His foreman Pearlie sat up in his bed, yawning and rubbing sleepy eyes, a puzzled expression on his wrinkled, sunburned face. Pearlie, get everybody up, Smoke said. Sheriff Monty Carson's horse showed up here, covered with blood. I think Monty may be out there in the night bleeding to death. We need to find him. Pearlie scrambled out of bed, clapping his hands and shouting, off your butts and on your feet. We got work to do and we got to do it fast. The cowboys, most of whom knew Monty and liked him, didn't argue. They swung out of their beds and began to pull their clothes on. Sally will have coffee ready over at the cabin. Report there when you're finished dressing, Smoke said as he left the bunkhouse. By the time Pearlie had his hands gathered outside the cabin, Sally had biscuits and sausage patties cooked along with a large pot of fresh coffee. Pearlie, a renowned chow hound, made sure he was at the front of the line for food. Having some of your fresh cooked biscuits and sausage almost makes getting up at this ungodly hour worth it, Miss Sally, he said, as he grabbed a handful of the sausage and biscuit sandwiches. Kyle Words, Pearlie's best friend and unofficial son to Smoke and Sally, spoke up from behind the four-man. Hey, go easy there, Pearlie. Anybody think you ain't eating for days the way you grabbing those sinkers? Pearlie puffed out his chest. The man who has to do most of the work gets the most food, Cal, my boy. That's the way it always been, and that's the way it always will be. Huh? Cal snorted through his nose. The only time you move faster in molasses in January is when you're rushing toward a mess tent. Pearlie shook his head. Boys, you just don't understand the difficulty of being in charge of a bunch of lazy gahoots loots like you causes a man. Why, I get plumb wore out just thinking on ways to get you to earn your salary. He paused to stuff another sandwich into his mouth as Smoke stepped up on the porch to address the group of men. Boys, we need to get moving. Monty is out there, so let's go find him. He glanced at Pearlie. Pearlie, you organize the men to cover all the territory between here and the gate to the road to Big Rock. If we don't find him, There, we'll move on down toward the town. Yes, sir, Smoke, Pearlie said, and he turned and began giving orders to the men on where to search. Sally put a hand on Smoke's arm. Perhaps we ought to send someone to Big Rock to fetch Doc Spaulding. Smoke nodded. Cal, hold on a minute. I want you to saddle up and ride as fast as you can to Big Rock and get Doc out here. And tell him to bring what he needs for a bullet wound. Cal nodded once and sprinted toward the barn to get his mount. It took the men less than 30 minutes to find the wounded Monty Carson and carried him to Smoke's cabin. Put him on the bed, Sally said. She tore open his shirt and looked at his wounds. She looked, glanced up at Smoke. Looks like he's been hit twice, just once just below the left shoulder and once in the chest. It isn't his lung? Smoke asked. She shook her head. I don't think so. He doesn't have any bloody froth on his lips, and he seems to be breathing all right. As Sally took cloths and dipped them in hot water and began to wash his wounds, Smoke bent over the bed, his lips close to Monty's ears. Monty, can you hear me? Monty's eyes flickered and opened, his lips curling in a half smile. Of course I can hear you, Smoke. I've been shot, but I ain't deaf. Smoke grinned. It was a good sign his friend could still joke in spite of having two bullets in him. Who did this to you, pal, and why? Monty's eyes moved to look at Sally, then back to Smoke. Big Jim Slaughter and his men. I thought Slaughter was up around Wyoming near the hole in the wall area. Monty nodded, then groaned with the pain the movement caused. He was. He decided to pay me a visit and talk over some old times. Smoke pursed his lips. He hadn't been aware that Monty used to ride with Slaughter, who was one of the most vicious and bloodthirsty killers still roaming the countryside. Before he could ask any questions, the door opened and Doc Cotton Spaulding walked in, followed by Cal. Sally stepped back from Monty's side, and she and the doc began to discuss his wounds and what to do next. Smoke grabbed Cal by the arm and led him out to the kitchen. Let's let the doc do his work in peace, Cal. Smoke went out on the porch and told the men waiting there he might thought Monty was going to be all right and they could go back to bed if they wanted. Pearlie laid his hand on the butt of his Colt pistol. Who did this to him, Smoke? Me and the boys like to have a talk with them galoots. Smoke held up his hands. There'll be plenty of time for that later, Pearlie. Soon as we find out what's going on, we'll do whatever it is necessary to help Monty. Pearlie scratched his chin, a glint in his eye. Any of Miss Sally's sausage and biscuits left? Smoke laughed. Cal, go in and get that platter and hand them out before Pearlie faints from hunger. Man ain't allowed hisself to get hungry in 10 years at least. Cal muttered as he went back inside the cabin. Like, comment, and subscribe on this video. Bye.